Focus back on conflict between the US and Iran at the NATO summit in Türkiye alongside Donald Trump's Greenland ambitions and dissatisfaction over defense spending. Support for Ukraine also a key issue. To look at all this, we have William Alberque. He's a senior Adjunct Fellow at the Pacific Forum. He joins us live from Berlin. Mr. Alberque, reports out in the last half hour suggesting Mr. Trump in the NATO summit meeting itself did not directly criticize Spain and did not mention Greenland. So in the context of everything we can expect, this is a good sign.
This is a very good sign. And I think this is a sign that it was pretty smart to have this summit in Turkey, because Trump obviously has a very close relationship with President Erdogan, and I don't think he will embarrass his host. Also, the U.S., Trump wants to overturn the decision not to sell F-35 fighters to Turkey, so that's a very big deal. So I think, while publicly yesterday he may have said some very abrasive things, I think within the meeting itself, it sounds like he is trying to foster good relations and make sure that the summit is a success for the host, Türkiye.
Given how important NATO is to regional security, in fact, global security, we should not be putting our hopes on just relations between the United States and the host, Türkiye, should we?
No, it's true. But for Donald Trump, optics really matter. And I think if he were to do severe damage to NATO during a summit hosted in Ankara, that would just be a huge blow to Erdogan's relationship. And, again, I think it is important. But you're right. The broader tensions between Donald Trump and the MAGA movement and the U.S. alliance relationships, not just with NATO, but with Japan and South Korea and Australia, are all under strain. And so his behavior here is being watched all around the world to see if Trump is going to do damage to this relationship, or if we get out of the Ankara summit with NATO continuing business as usual, trying to do all its background work on strengthening the alliance, strengthening European security, and continuing support for Ukraine.
The deals we've seen, certainly in the last 24 hours, that should go some way to taking the sting out of, say, MAGA's most stringent accusations against NATO European members.
Absolutely, yes. The emphasis of this summit really has been, strengthening military spending by the European allies, increasing the defense industrial base in Europe in order to take care of the needs of NATO to supply things like ammunition, especially air defense missiles, anti-tank missiles, air surveillance, aircraft refueling, strategic lift, all the things that NATO historically has depended entirely on the United States, with the Europeans stepping up not just to purchase these things from the United States, but building its own defense industrial base, is so important to communicating long-term that Europe can defend itself and is not solely dependent on American resources to deter Russia.
So it's really in Europe's interest at this point if Ukraine should be allowed certainly to join NATO.
Well, it's really interesting because, Ukraine, as President Zelensky said yesterday in his speech to the NATO Defense Industry Forum, Ukraine is the world standard in how to defend a country against drone strikes. They're being subject to drone strikes on an order of magnitude greater than any of the Gulf states saw from Iran. I mean, we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of drones and missiles every week being hurled at Ukraine. And Ukraine's ability to defend itself against drones, also its sophisticated knowledge on how to build drones to attack Russia. We've seen extraordinary attacks all across Russia, not just in occupied Crimea and other parts of Ukraine, but on Russian territory, deep inside Russian territory. It is extraordinary. And so having Ukraine in the alliance at a time when we're seeing increased mysterious drone flights over things like Copenhagen Airport or Lakenheath Air Force Base, we're seeing these drones and they're suspected to be of Russian origin. We're going to need greater expertise and strength in fighting drone threats. And like I said, Ukraine is the best in the world at this. I agree with Zelensky. Having Ukraine as part of the NATO alliance is probably the only way in the long term to deter Russia. And it's certainly in the short term the only way to defeat the drone threat.
And just this week, we've seen what happens if Ukraine runs out of Patriot interceptors.
That's absolutely right. And so we've heard news that there's going to be a European refurbishment site for Patriots. So that way, the older Patriots that they're trying to prepare for use don't have to go back to the factories and delay production. That's good news. There may be a deal, we don't know yet, about manufacturing Patriots in Ukraine. Ukraine will certainly prioritize that massively and be able to supply their own needs. But in the meantime, the Europeans are asking themselves, do they have enough Patriots themselves to give to Ukraine? And what does that do to NATO's defenses in the short term while we're all waiting for American production to ramp up?
All right. Real progress on this will require several years, at the very least, possibly decades of rearmament in Europe. Having a NATO summit every year in which promises may or may not be kept and genuinely cannot be kept, is that a good idea? Final question.
Well, yeah. The schedule of summits has increased so much in the past 15 years. It's really extraordinary. I mean, we had 12 summits during the entire Cold War, and we've had, another like 20 odd summits in the past 20 years. The summits are being held basically to try to force allies to deliver on their promises, because when you bring together the heads of state, they can check your homework basically and force you to do what you said you're going to do. But as we've seen during the Trump administration, this only increases the risk that Trump is going to turn his ire against the alliance. So it's a relatively low reward and very high risk situation that we're in right now. I suspect we're not going to have another summit for another couple of years, probably till the end of the Trump administration, unless Trump radically changes how he feels about the NATO alliance in order to reduce the risks. And in the meantime, we'll just have to trust the allies to go ahead and deliver on what they're promising and use defense ministerials or foreign ministerials at a slightly lower level to, push progress along. But yes, the summit process has just been incredibly risky during the Trump administration because you just don't know what he's going to do.
Oh, thanks. William Alberque, Senior Adjunct Fellow of the Pacific Forum, looking at, or at least at the tail end, nothing gone wrong so far at the latest summit in Ankara. Thank you.